Amara entered Sterling PR's lobby, her steps measured, her presence quietly commanding. The receptionist's eyes flicked up, her smile faltering as she took in Amara's confident posture and the portfolio tucked under her arm. There was a pause, just a second too long before she spoke. "Name, please?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Amara responded, her voice steady. "Amara Jordan. I have a meeting with Victoria Crane." The receptionist glanced at the appointment. "Book," her fingers hesitating before she found the name. "Third floor," she said, pushing a visitor badge across the counter with a practiced motion. As Amara pinned the badge to her blazer, she caught the receptionist exchanging a quick look with a colleague nearby. It was subtle, but the message was clear. Amara was being measured, assessed, and found unfamiliar. She offered a nod, refusing to let the moment rattle her, and made her way toward the elevators. A janitor paused in his work, watching her with a quiet, knowing look. He didn't say a word, but the slight dip of his head was enough to signal he understood the weight of these small daily tests. Inside the elevator, Amara's reflection appeared in the polished doors, fragmented by the metallic seams. She straightened. Her jacket exhaled and prepared herself for the meeting ahead. Down in the lobby, the receptionist's voice was low as she picked up the phone, announcing Amara's arrival in a tone that betrayed more than simple routine. The space, filled with the hum of distant conversations and the faint scent of fresh coffee, seemed to close in around her, amplifying the unspoken tension. As the elevator ascended, Amara's grip on her portfolio tightened. She was no stranger to rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. No stranger to the subtle signals that she was an outsider. But she carried herself forward, each step an act of quiet defiance, determined to claim her place at the table no matter how many glass walls she had to walk through. Before the story continues, please let us know from where you are watching this video. Write your city or country in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you believe in stories that challenge injustice. Your engagement gives power to voices that need to be heard. Amara sat across from Victoria Crane, the polished table between them gleaming under the harsh office lights. Her portfolio lay unopened, a silent testament to the dismissal she was about to face. Victoria's eyes flicked over Amara with a practiced coolness, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the glossy surface. "Your proposal is interesting," Victoria began, her voice clipped and formal. "But it doesn't align with our current direction." Amara's gaze remained steady, her voice calm but firm. "I believe it's exactly what the market needs." Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, a subtle curl at the corner betraying her skepticism. "Our clients prefer broader appeal. Your focus is niche." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Amara's fingers tightened around the edge of her folder. "Niche is profitable," she replied quietly, refusing to let her confidence waver. A brief silence followed, filled only by the distant hum of office activity. Victoria's eyes darted to a framed photo on her desk, an all-white executive team smiling confidently back at her. She glanced back at Amara, the weight of the room shifting. "We appreciate your time," Victoria said, standing abruptly. "We'll be in touch." Amara nodded, rising with composed grace. As she gathered her things, a junior assistant nearby exchanged a glance with a colleague, their expressions a mix of sympathy and resignation, knowing they had witnessed a familiar scene. Outside the room, Amara's footsteps echoed down the hallway. The door closed softly behind her, the untouched folder on the table a stark symbol of exclusion. The janitor paused in the corridor, watching her pass. He gave a slight nod, a quiet acknowledgement of the battle fought in silence, and the dignity Amara carried with her as she walked away. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle curl of her lips betraying the rehearsed politeness in her voice. "Your aesthetic is too niche," she said, the words hanging in the air like a quiet verdict. Amara's gaze didn't waver. She folded her hands calmly on the polished table. the weight of the room pressing down but not breaking her resolve. "Niche is profitable," she replied softly, her voice steady but charged with quiet defiance. The silence that followed was thick, filled with the unspoken history of countless pitches dismissed for reasons never fully explained. Victoria's fingers drummed lightly on the table, a nervous tick masked as impatience. Her eyes flicked to the framed photo of the all-white executive team behind her, then back to Amara, as if seeking reassurance from the image. Amara's mind drifted briefly to the countless others who had been told the same thing in different words, their dreams folded away like forgotten documents. She felt the weight of their stories in the room, a silent chorus urging her to stand firm. Victoria's voice broke the quiet, softer now, almost reluctant. "We need campaigns that appeal to the broadest audience. Your focus, it's too specific." Amara's lips pressed into a thin line, her reply measured. "Specificity builds loyalty. It creates communities. It drives change." A junior assistant shifted uneasily nearby, stealing a glance at Amara's composed face. The tension in the room was palpable, a battle fought not with raised voices, but with loaded glances and the subtle power of words left unsaid. Victoria's gaze faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing her features before she masked it with a tight smile. "Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch." Amara stood slowly, gathering her portfolio with deliberate care. Her eyes met the assistant's briefly, a silent exchange of understanding and resilience. As she turned to leave, the door closed. Softly behind her, the echo a quiet punctuation to a story far from over. As Amara rose from her chair, her eyes were drawn to the framed photograph on Victoria's desk. The image was striking. An all-white executive team, arms linked, their smiles wide and self-assured. The photo seemed to radiate authority, a silent declaration of who belonged and who did not. Victoria noticed Amara's lingering gaze and shifted, in her seat, her hand moving to straighten the frame. The gesture was small but telling, a reflex to maintain the image of unity and control. The room felt colder, the air heavier, with a truth that needed no words. Amara let her eyes linger a moment longer, taking in the polished frames, the pristine awards, the curated perfection of a space designed to impress. Yet beneath the surface, the message was unmistakable. Diversity was not just absent, it was deliberately excluded. Every object on the desk, every photo on the wall reinforced the boundaries that had just closed around her. A junior assistant entered quietly, placing a stack of documents on Victoria's desk. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at Amara, her expression flickering with something like regret. The assistant's presence was brief, but her uncertainty lingered, another subtle crack in the facade of seamless power. Victoria cleared her throat, her voice regaining its practiced smoothness. "We value all perspectives here," she said, but the words felt rehearsed, hollow against the backdrop of the photo. Amara offered a polite nod, her composure unshaken, but inside she felt the sting of being so clearly uninvited. As Amara turned to leave, she caught her own reflection in the glass of the photo frame, her face, strong and resolute, standing apart from the group behind the glass. The image stayed with her as she walked out, a reminder of the quiet walls built by those in power, and the strength it would take to break through them. Amara gathered her portfolio, the weight of the untouched proposal heavy in her hands. She rose from the chair with a calm that belied the storm beneath her skin. The room felt colder now, the polished surfaces reflecting the quiet tension that lingered like a shadow. Victoria's eyes flicked briefly toward the door, a subtle sign of relief masked by a tight smile. Amara's footsteps echoed softly down the hallway, each step a measured beat in a rhythm of resilience. The janitor paused mid-sweep, his gaze following her retreating figure. He gave a slight nod, a gesture small but filled with understanding, a silent salute to the dignity she carried despite the dismissal. Outside the conference room, a junior assistant exchanged a glance with a colleague, their eyes speaking volumes of the familiar scene they had just witnessed. The air was thick with unspoken stories, the weight of countless others who had walked this path before. Amara's breath was steady as she reached the elevator, the doors sliding open like a gateway to the next battle. Her reflection fractured in the polished metal, a mosaic of strength and quiet defiance. The door closed behind her with a soft click, the sound a punctuation mark on a chapter far from over. The untouched folder on the table remained, a stark symbol of exclusion and the silent wars fought in boardrooms. Her mind was already moving forward, the quiet storm gathering within, ready to rise. Marcus entered the conference room with his head held high, portfolio tucked under his arm, and hope flickering in his eyes. The panel of executives barely looked up from their tablets as he set his materials on the table. He launched into his pitch, dynamic, community-driven, full of vibrant imagery and real-world impact. The room, however, felt colder with each passing minute. The lead executive, a man with silver hair and a practiced, distant smile, interrupted before Marcus could finish his opening. "Your campaign is too urban," the executive said, his voice measured, gaze fixed on a spot just beyond Marcus's shoulder. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Marcus paused, searching the faces around the table for a hint of understanding or curiosity. Instead, he found only blank stares and the faintest shake of a head from a junior staffer in the corner. Marcus tried to recover, his voice steady but softer. Urban means relevant. It means connected to the people who actually drive trends. His words were met with a dismissive glance. Another executive, a woman with a tight bun and clipped tone, added, "We're looking for something with broader appeal, something less specific." The phrase stung. Marcus felt the weight of every time he'd been told to water down his vision, to make his ideas more palatable, less rooted in his own experience. He looked down at his portfolio, pages of research, testimonials, and creative concepts, now just another stack of paper waiting to be forgotten. A brief, uncomfortable silence filled the room. The junior staffer shifted in her chair, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her notepad. She caught Marcus's eye for a moment, her expression apologetic, but she said nothing. Marcus gathered his materials slowly, each movement deliberate. He stood, offered a polite nod, and left the room, with as much dignity as he could muster. Behind him, the executives returned to their screens, the moment already fading from their memory. In the hallway, Marcus paused, letting the disappointment settle. He glanced down at his portfolio, the colors bold and bright against the sterile backdrop of the office. He knew this wasn't the first time his ideas had been dismissed for being too urban, and it likely wouldn't be the last. But as he walked away, he resolved that his vision would not be erased by their narrow view. Elena sat across from the Sterling PR team, her hands resting on a folder labeled Justice for Families. Her campaign was bold, centering immigrant voices, demanding fair housing and urging real change. She spoke with conviction, her eyes shining with hope as she described community rallies, grassroots stories, and the faces behind the statistics. For a moment, it seemed the room might listen. But as her presentation ended, a senior executive leaned back, arms crossed, and offered a tight, practiced smile. "It's a strong concept, Elena, but it's a bit high risk for our current portfolio. We're looking to avoid controversy this quarter." Another manager nodded, shuffling a stack of reports, never quite meeting Elena's gaze. "We have to be careful with messaging. Too political, and you lose the middle ground." Elena's heart pounded. She tried to push back, her voice steady, but urgent. "This isn't about politics. It's about people. These stories matter." The team exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. The conversation shifted quickly. The meeting wrapped up with a promise to circle back that Elena knew was empty. Days later, Elena received an email. Her campaign would be archived for potential future review. She sat at her kitchen table, the words blurring on the screen. Her handwritten notes, Justice for Families, Voices Unheard, were tucked away in a drawer, the ink smudged from anxious fingers. Months passed. Elena watched a news clip of a protest she'd once helped organize, her face in the background, chanting for change. The campaign she'd poured her heart into was never mentioned, buried beneath corporate caution and the fear of taking a stand. Back at Sterling, her proposal sat at the bottom of a filing cabinet, sandwiched between old press releases and forgotten pitches. The office buzzed with new projects, none as bold or urgent as hers. A junior staffer, filing documents late one evening, paused over Elena's folder. She traced the title with her thumb, a flicker of regret in her eyes, before sliding it back into the shadows. Elena's silence was not her choice, but it was the only option left by a system that prized comfort over courage. The office hummed with the low buzz of computers and the soft tapping of keys. A marketing associate sat at her desk, the blue light of her monitor washing her face in a pale glow. She scrolled through the latest internal emails, each new message adding another layer to the unspoken rules she'd learned to follow. The subject lines were always innocuous: campaign feedback, client preferences, but the content was clear. Focus on safe demographics. Let's avoid ethnic themes for this quarter. The words were clinical, stripped of emotion, but their impact was unmistakable. She hesitated before replying, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. A framed photo of the agency's diverse holiday party sat on her desk, the smiling faces in sharp contrast to the exclusionary language on her screen. She glanced at her supervisor's office, door closed, blinds drawn. The message was clear: keep things comfortable, don't rock the boat. A junior colleague rolled her chair over, voice barely above a whisper. You know it's always like this, right? Her eyes darted toward the inbox, then back to the associate's face. The associate nodded, her jaw tight, the weight of complicity pressing down on her chest. She typed a reply that echoed the company line, her heart pounding as she hit send. Outside, the city bustled, oblivious to the quiet decisions being made in that sterile office. The chain of emails grew longer, each response another thread in a tapestry that kept certain voices at the margins. The blinking cursor on the screen became a symbol of the choices made in the shadows, choices that determined who would be seen and who would be left behind. As the associate logged off for the night, she caught her reflection in the darkened monitor. For a moment, she wondered how many more times she would have to choose between her job and her conscience, and how many stories would remain untold because of a few lines in an email. The coffee shop was quiet except for the low murmur of conversations and the occasional clink of cups. Amara sat at a corner table, her eyes scanning the worn pages of a crumpled letter she had found tucked beneath a chair. The words, written in hurried, shaky handwriting, read, "I quit because silence is complicity." Her fingers traced the creases, the paper fragile from being folded and unfolded countless times. The weight of the message settled heavily in the air, a stark reminder of the unspoken truths that lingered beneath the polished surface of Sterling PR. Nearby, the barista, a black woman with tired eyes but a knowing smile, watched Amara with quiet understanding. She wiped down the counter slowly, her movements deliberate, as if marking time in a place where change was slow to come. Amara's mind drifted to the countless others who had left, their voices swallowed by routine and fear. The letter was more than a resignation. It was a testament to the cost of staying silent in a system built on exclusion. She folded the letter carefully, slipping it into her portfolio. The camera lingered on the barista's face, a flicker of hope shining through years of weariness. Amara stood, her resolve hardening. The quiet rebellion was no longer just hers. It was a movement gathering strength in the shadows, ready to step into the light. Marcus Lee hunched over his laptop, the pale light from the screen illuminating his focused face in the quiet of his apartment. The leaked document from Sterling PR was a spreadsheet, rows of client names, campaign notes, and a column marked in red for not a fit. He scrolled, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the pattern. Every minority-owned brand, every campaign that spoke to real community issues, was marked for removal or never advanced beyond the first meeting. He cross-referenced the list with Sterling's public partnerships, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. The pattern was clear. Brands led by people of color, or those with messages of inclusion, were consistently dropped. The reality of it settled in his chest, a cold certainty that this was not an accident, but a routine decision made behind closed doors. His phone buzzed with a message from a fellow journalist. "You see in this? This is the story." Marcus's mind flashed back to interviews he'd conducted over the years, entrepreneurs with hope in their voices, now replaced by resignation. He remembered one woman's words. "They said my story was too specific. I guess that means too real." The weight of their disappointment pressed on him as he drafted his exposé, each word a step closer to exposing the truth. He paused, staring at the screen, the names highlighted in red like warning lights. The city outside his window moved on, oblivious to the quiet decisions shaping whose voices would be heard and whose would be erased. Marcus hit send, his article now live. The headline bold, "Sterling PR's Demographic Betrayal Exposed." He leaned back, exhausted and resolved to mingling. The story was out. The quiet exclusion that had shaped so many careers was now visible for all to see. Marcus knew the fallout would come, but for the first time, the truth was no longer hidden, in a spreadsheet or buried in an email chain. It was out in the open, demanding to be reckoned with. Amara's apartment glowed with the soft light of her desk lamp, stacks of sketch pads and empty coffee cups scattered around her workspace. The city outside was quiet, but inside her energy was relentless. She sat hunched over her laptop, headphones on, editing video clips for her campaign. Her fingers moved quickly, adjusting color, adding bold text overlays, syncing the beat to every transition. Each night blurred into the next. She worked through exhaustion, fueled by a mix of frustration and hope. TikTok drafts piled up. Short, punchy videos featuring Afrofuturist designs, powerful slogans, and real stories from her community. She scrolled through comments, her heart pounding at every like, every share. Some messages were supportive. "This is what we need." Others stung. "Not mainstream enough." Still, she pressed on, undeterred. Her phone buzzed with a late-night call from her best friend. "Are you still at it?" the voice asked, half admiring, half concerned. Amara smiled, rubbing her tired eyes. "I can't stop now. I'm so close." She glanced at her vision board, pinned with photos, color swatches, and her campaign's tagline, "Ethical is universal." She paused to stretch, looking around at the chaos of her creative process. Every scrap of paper, every open tab on her browser felt like a step toward something bigger. She thought of the doors slammed in her face, the rooms where her ideas were dismissed as too niche. Here, in her own space, she was free to build without compromise. As dawn crept in, Amara uploaded her latest teaser. She watched the first. Views trickle in, a small but growing wave. Her exhaustion faded, replaced by a quiet pride. She knew the odds were against her, but she also knew that real change started with late nights, stubborn hope, and the courage to keep going when no one else believed. Amara's phone buzzed nonstop, the screen lighting up with a flood of notifications. Her latest TikTok teaser had gone live just hours before, and now the numbers were climbing faster than she could track. She watched the view count surge past 100,000, comments pouring in. Finally, someone who gets it. "This is the voice we've been waiting for." A chorus of affirmation that filled her small apartment with a sense of hope she hadn't felt in months. She leaned back in her chair, letting a quiet, satisfied smile spread across her face. The sting of every boardroom dismissal, every time she'd been told her ideas were too niche, began to fade under the weight of real validation. Yet, as she scrolled, a sharp notification caught her eye, a direct message from a Sterling PR intern. The words were blunt and dismissive. "Still not mainstream enough." Amara paused, her thumb hovering over the screen. She took a slow breath, then calmly screenshotted the message, a reminder of the walls she was breaking through, and the resistance she still faced. Her gaze shifted to her laptop, where her campaign tagline glowed. Ethical is universal. The room was dim, the blue light casting shifting shadows across her determined features. She whispered to herself, "This isn't a niche. This is necessary." The words hung in the air, quiet but powerful. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding in Amara's apartment. Her campaign was no longer just a personal project. It was a movement, gathering strength with every view, every share, every hopeful comment. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from her best friend. "You're trending," came the breathless voice on the other end. Amara smiled, steady and calm. "Let them watch," she replied, her confidence unwavering. As the night deepened, Amara's screen faded to black, but the words lingered in her mind. Change doesn't trend. It stays. Marcus Lee's apartment was cluttered with notes, empty mugs, and the persistent glow of his laptop screen. He hunched forward, eyes narrowed as he pored over the leaked Sterling PR document. Each row of the spreadsheet told a story, minority-owned, brands marked in red, campaigns with any hint of social justice quietly flagged as not a fit. He compared the list to Sterling's public client roster, highlighting the glaring omissions. The pattern was undeniable. Diversity was systematically erased, not by accident, but by calculated choice. He scrolled through old interview notes, recalling the voices of entrepreneurs who'd trusted him with their stories. "They said it. Wasn't the right time for my campaign?" one confided, her voice brittle with disappointment. Another shrugged. "They want our culture, not our faces." Marcus felt the collective weight of those stories settle on his shoulders. He knew this exposé was more than a scoop. It was a reckoning. His phone buzzed with a message from a fellow journalist. "You're about to blow this wide open." Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, urgency driving every word. He wrote about the patterns he'd uncovered, the coded language in internal emails, the way Sterling's leadership justified their choices under the guise of market strategy. He included screenshots, anonymized testimonies, and a timeline that made the exclusion impossible to deny. As he finished the final paragraph, Marcus paused, reading over his work. The silence in his apartment felt loaded, as if the city itself was holding its breath. With a steady hand, he hit publish. The headline appeared in bold, "Sterling PR's demographic betrayal exposed." Within minutes, his phone erupted, with notifications, retweets, messages from advocacy groups, calls from newsrooms. Outside his window, the city lights blinked on, unaware that the ground had just shifted. Marcus leaned back, exhaustion and relief mingling in his chest. For the first time, the stories that had been quietly erased were now impossible to ignore, and the walls that had kept them out were beginning to crumble. Amara sat at her cluttered desk, surrounded by campaign drafts and the faint glow of her laptop. Her best friend leaned in close, worry etched across her face. "They'll steal it," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "You know how they work. They'll take your idea, change a few words, and call it their own." Amara didn't flinch. She closed her laptop with a quiet, deliberate motion and met her friend's gaze head-on. "Let them try," she replied, her voice unwavering. "The truth sticks. If they take it, everyone will know where it started." Her friend's shoulders dropped, the tension in the room shifting to something softer, tinged with admiration and concern. The city outside pulsed with life, but in this small apartment, the air was thick with possibility and risk. Amara's campaign boards were scattered across the table, sketched logos, handwritten notes, hashtags circled in red. Her friend's eyes lingered on them, pride and fear mingling in her expression. "You're brave," she said quietly, almost as if she was reminding herself. Amara offered a small, fierce smile. "Bravery isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just not letting go." She reached for her phone, watching as notifications rolled in. Likes, shares, new followers. The momentum was building, and with every message of support, her resolve grew stronger. She glanced at her friend, her tone softer but resolute. "This is just the beginning. I'm not backing down." Her friend nodded, the unspoken understanding settling between them. In a world that so often tried to erase voices like Amara's, every act of creation was an act of resistance. The camera lingered on Amara's hands, steady, unshaken, before fading to black, the promise of what was to come hanging in the air. Sterling's boardroom was a hive of tension, the glow of multiple screens casting harsh light on faces etched with panic. Executives argued in clipped tones, their words overlapping in a chaotic symphony of blame and fear. One voice rose above the rest, sharp and urgent. "Fix this mess now." Victoria Crane sat at the head of the table. Her usual composure cracked. Her eyes darted between the live social media feeds and the plummeting stock charts displayed on the monitors. The weight of the unfolding crisis pressed down, her fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the polished wood. A junior analyst shuffled, papers nervously, avoiding eye contact as she whispered, "The campaign backlash is worse than we anticipated. The hashtag abhorrent ethical is universal is trending worldwide." Victoria's jaw tightened. "We underestimated the reach. This isn't just a PR problem, it's a reckoning." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the rapid typing of a communications officer drafting a damage control statement. The tension was palpable, the old guard's grip slipping as the walls closed in. Outside the boardroom, the hum of the city continued, oblivious to the collapse within. Yet inside, every second felt like a countdown, the empire's foundation, cracking under the weight of truth. A senior executive leaned forward, voice low but firm. "We need a new strategy, one that acknowledges the past but looks to the future." Victoria nodded slowly, the fight draining from her eyes. "Agreed, but it starts with listening. Really listening." The camera lingers on the flickering screens, the faces of those who once held power now shadowed by doubt and uncertainty. The boardroom, once a fortress, was now a crucible for change. The crowd outside Sterling's office swelled with quiet determination, signs held high bearing the words, "Check ethical is universal." The chant was low but steady, a pulse that echoed through the glass lobby, rattling the untouched latte on Victoria's desk inside. A security guard, a black man in his 50s, watched with a small, knowing smile, his eyes reflecting years of waiting for this moment. Inside, the atmosphere was charged yet restrained. The hashtag was more than a slogan. It was a declaration, a rallying cry for those long overlooked. The camera lingered on faces in the crowd, young activists, weary elders, hopeful children, all united by a shared demand for recognition and justice. Victoria sat behind her desk, the weight of the moment pressing down. Her gaze flickered to the screen showing social media feeds, the hashtag trending worldwide. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the old guard's grip loosened. Outside, the chant grew louder, a wave of voices rising in unison. The security guard's smile deepened, a silent acknowledgement that change was no longer a whisper, but a roar. The scene closed on the hashtag glowing on a giant billboard, its light casting long shadows over the city, a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of quiet resilience. The crowd's energy was palpable, a mix of quiet pride and fierce determination. Faces of all ages and backgrounds reflected the long journey toward justice, their eyes bright with the promise of a new day. The hashtag had become a symbol, a shared language for those who had been sidelined for too long. Inside the office, Victoria's fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through the endless stream of posts and shares. The realization that the tide was turning settled heavily on her shoulders. The campaign she had dismissed was now a movement unstoppable and undeniable. The security guard, once a silent observer, now stood a little taller, his presence a quiet testament to the power of persistence. The city outside seemed to hold its breath, the glow of the hashtag casting a hopeful light on streets that had long been shadowed by exclusion. As the sun set, the billboard's glow grew stronger, illuminating the faces of those who had fought in silence and now stood ready to be seen. The hashtag was no longer just a trend. It was a legacy in the making. The stock ticker flashed a relentless red, numbers tumbling like falling dominoes across the brokerage floor. Traders stared in disbelief, their faces pale as the reality of Sterling PR's collapse sank in. The once mighty firm, a symbol of polished success, was unraveling in real time. A janitor paused mid-sweep, mop resting against the wall. Her eyes caught the glowing screen, reflecting the plummeting stock. "Price?" She shook her head slowly, muttering under her breath, "'Bout time," before resuming her work with a quiet resolve. Inside the trading room, phones rang off the hook, but the calls went unanswered. The hum of frantic whispers filled the air, a stark contrast to the usual confident chatter. A young trader clenched his jaw, staring at the screen as the numbers dipped further, the weight of systemic failure pressing down. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the seismic shift happening within the glass walls. Yet, in that moment, the fall of Sterling PR was more than a financial loss. It was a symbolic reckoning. The walls that had kept voices out were crumbling, the silence broken by the undeniable truth. The janitor's mop bucket caught the flickering red light, a small beacon in the dim room. She glanced around, her expression unreadable but resolute. The collapse was silent, but its impact would echo far beyond the trading floor. As the ticker continued its descent, the camera pulled back, revealing the emptying seats and the fading glow of screens. The empire's foundation was cracking, and the future was uncertain, but change, long overdue, was finally underway. Victoria Crane sat before the camera, the studio lights harsh against her pale skin. Her eyeliner was smudged, a telltale sign of the tension she tried to mask. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, the weight of the apology she was about to deliver pressing down on her. "We misjudged the market," she began, her voice faltering just enough to betray the rehearsed calm. The words felt hollow, echoing in the sterile room where every second stretched longer than the last. Off to the side, a muted monitor played Amara's viral campaign. Bold colors, powerful faces, a message that had swept across social media like wildfire. The contrast was stark, the campaign's energy mocking Victoria's faltering admission. The live-stream chat exploded with reactions, emojis flooding the screen, comments ranging from scorn to cautious hope. Victoria's eyes flicked nervously. To the feed, the weight of public judgment settling like a stone in her chest. Behind the scenes, the PR team scrambled, whispering urgent instructions, their faces pale and drawn. The old guard's grip was slipping, the empire cracking under. The pressure of truth. Victoria's voice steadied, but the damage was done. "We are committed to learning and growing," she added, the words rehearsed but lacking conviction. The camera held on her face, capturing the subtle cracks, the tight smile, the fleeting glance away, the silent admission of defeat. As the live stream ended, the room exhaled collectively, the quiet tension lingering like a storm yet to break. "We misjudged the market." The phrase repeated in Victoria's mind, a mantra of downfall and reluctant acceptance. Amara stood before the mural, its vibrant colors glowing softly under the afternoon sun. The faces of black entrepreneurs, painted with bold strokes and fierce pride, surrounded her like a protective shield. The crowd hushed, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. She adjusted the microphone, her voice steady, but filled with quiet power. "You called my vision niche," she said, gesturing to the mural behind her. "The world called it necessary." A young girl in the front row wiped a tear from her cheek, her eyes wide with hope and recognition. Around Amara, the community stood, united, their faces reflecting years of struggle and the promise of change. Victoria Crane watched from the sidelines, her usual composure faltering as she took in the scene. The mural was more than art. It was a declaration, a challenge to the old guard's narrow views. Her lips pressed into a thin line, the weight of the moment pressing down. The camera panned over the crowd, capturing the silent strength in their eyes, the subtle nods exchanged between neighbors. The hashtag, ethical is universal, trended on screens nearby, a digital echo of the mural's message. Amara's words hung in the air, a quiet but unyielding call for justice and inclusion. The mural was a beacon, a symbol of resilience and the power of voices long ignored. As the sun dipped lower, the colors deepened, casting long shadows that stretched across the faces in the crowd. The moment was a turning point, not loud or explosive, but steady and sure. The crowd's applause was soft but sincere, a wave of affirmation that promised the fight was far from over, but the path was clear. Victoria Crane sat alone in her dimly lit office, the glow of her laptop screen casting sharp shadows across her face. Her fingers trembled slightly as she refreshed her LinkedIn profile, watching in disbelief as connections began to disappear one by one. Each unfollow felt like a silent indictment, a quiet unraveling of the carefully constructed image she had maintained for years. Her profile photo, once crisp and confident, began to pixelate on the screen, the edges blurring as if reflecting the fading power she once wielded. Comments flooded in beneath her posts. Hashtags like "Charsk Ethical is Universal" trending, voices rising in a chorus of accountability and change. Victoria's eyes darted nervously between the messages, the weight of public judgment settling heavily. The office around her felt smaller, the walls closing in as the reality of her downfall became undeniable. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly, the fight draining from her eyes. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft hum of the computer and the distant city sounds filtering through the window. A notification popped up. Another connection, severed. Her hand hovered over the mouse, hesitant to close the browser, yet unable to look away. The digital world she had controlled was slipping through her fingers, pixel by pixel. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet collapse, unfolding behind glass walls. But inside, Victoria Crane faced the stark truth. The era of exclusion was ending, and with it, her reign. The screen faded to black, the last image a fractured reflection of a woman forced to confront the consequences of her choices. The soft glow of the city lights seeped through the blinds, casting long shadows that stretched across the room like silent witnesses. Victoria's breath hitched as she stared at the screen, the weight of years of decisions pressing down on her chest. The quiet hum of the computer was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside her mind. Her fingers trembled again, this time from exhaustion rather than fear. She closed her eyes briefly, recalling moments when she had dismissed voices like Amara's with a tight smile and averted gaze. The stock ticker flashed a relentless red, numbers tumbling like falling dominoes across the brokerage floor. Traders stared in disbelief, their faces pale as the reality of Sterling PR's collapse sank in. The once mighty firm, a symbol of polished success, was unraveling in real time. A janitor paused mid-sweep, mop resting against the wall. Her eyes caught the glowing screen, reflecting the plummeting stock price. She shook her head slowly, muttering under her breath, "About time," before resuming her work with a quiet resolve. Inside the trading room, phones rang off the hook, but the calls went unanswered. The hum of frantic whispers filled the air, a stark contrast to the usual confident chatter. A young trader clenched his jaw, staring at the screen as the numbers dipped further, the weight of systemic failure pressing down. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious to the seismic shift happening within the glass walls. Yet, in that moment, the fall of Sterling PR was more than a financial loss. It was a symbolic reckoning. The walls that had kept voices out were crumbling, the silence broken by the undeniable truth. The janitor's mop bucket caught the flickering red light, a small beacon in the dim room. She glanced around, her expression unreadable but resolute. The collapse was silent, but its impact would echo far beyond the trading floor. As the ticker continued its descent, the camera pulled back, revealing the emptying seats and the fading glow of screens. The empire's foundation was cracking, and the future was uncertain. But change, long overdue, was finally underway. The numbers on the ticker refused to stop falling, each drop a blow to the confidence that had once filled these halls. A middle-aged trader ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure replaced by a tight jaw and furrowed brow. Nearby, a young analyst bit her lip, eyes darting between screens as she tried to make sense of the chaos. The janitor, a quiet witness to the rise and fall of empires, paused again, this time leaning on her mop. Her gaze was steady, unshaken by the turmoil. The crowd pressed forward, microphones thrust toward Amara as she stood calm and composed, flanked by her team. The reporter's voice cut through the murmurs, sharp and insistent. "What's next for Sterling?" The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation and the weight of a city watching for her response. Amara's eyes scanned the faces before her, taking in the hope, the skepticism, the hunger for something new. She paused, letting the moment settle, her breath measured and her posture unwavering. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, quiet, yet carried the unmistakable force of conviction. "I don't think about Sterling," she said, each word deliberate, unhurried. "The future doesn't either." A hush rippled through the crowd, the silence speaking louder than any applause. Behind her, the mural of black entrepreneurs loomed, their painted eyes seeming to watch and approve. The camera panned across the audience, catching subtle nods, moist eyes, and the quiet realization that the balance of power had shifted. The reporter tried again, voice softer now, but Amara's calm resolve was unshakable. Her team stood at her side, a living wall of support and quiet strength. The city's usual hum faded, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of change, one that didn't need to shout to be heard. Nearby, a young activist leaned toward a friend and whispered, "She's not just speaking for herself, she's speaking for all of us." The words hung in the air, a promise and a challenge. The scene closed on Amara's unwavering gaze, the promise of resilience and dignity etched into every line of her face. In that moment, the future was no longer a question to be asked. It had become a certainty, built on the quiet courage of those who refused to be overlooked. Victoria Crane's office was silent, the usual hum of activity replaced by an eerie stillness. The boardroom, once a fortress of power and decision-making, now lay deserted. Half-empty coffee cups and scattered printouts of Amara's campaign littered the polished table, remnants of a meeting that had ended in quiet defeat. The camera lingered. On Victoria's vacant chair, her nameplate slightly askew, a symbol of the unraveling control she once wielded. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting long shadows that stretched like prison bars across the room, a visual metaphor for the confinement of outdated mindsets. Outside, the distant murmur of protesters echoed faintly, their voices a reminder. The change was no longer a whisper but a rising tide. The office walls, adorned with awards and framed photos, seemed to close in, bearing silent witness to the collapse of an empire built on exclusion. A junior assistant entered hesitantly, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. She paused, by the doorway, glancing at the scattered documents with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Her eyes met those of a security guard who gave a subtle nod, acknowledging the shift in power. The assistant's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for a printout of Amara's campaign, the bold colors and powerful slogans a stark contrast to the sterile environment. She traced the edges with a tentative touch, as if feeling the weight of a new era pressing down. Victoria's nameplate caught a stray beam of light, glinting sharply as if signaling the end of an era. The scene closed on the empty boardroom, the silence heavy, but charged with the promise of transformation. The echoes of arrogance had faded, replaced by the quiet strength of resilience and hope. The janitor, passing by the glass walls, paused briefly, his gaze lingering on the empty room. He shook his head slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, before continuing his rounds. The air was thick with the unspoken truth. The old order was crumbling, and a new chapter was beginning. The crowd outside Sterling's office gathered with quiet determination, holding signs high with the words, "Hakshirus ethical is universal." Their chant was steady, a rhythmic pulse that echoed through the glass lobby and rattled the untouched latte on Victoria's desk. A security guard, a black man in his 50s, watched the scene unfold with a knowing smile, his eyes reflecting years of waiting for this moment. Inside, the mood was tense but controlled. The hashtag was more than a slogan. It had become a declaration, a rallying cry for those long overlooked. The camera lingered on faces in the crowd, young activists, weary elders, hopeful children, all united by a shared demand for recognition and justice. Victoria sat behind her desk, the weight of the moment pressing down. Her gaze flickered to the screen showing social media feeds, the hashtag trending worldwide. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the old guard's grip loosened. Outside, the chant grew louder, a wave of voices rising together. The security guard's smile deepened, a silent acknowledgement that change was no longer a whisper, but a roar. The scene shifted to the hashtag glowing on a giant billboard, its light casting long shadows over the city, a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of quiet resilience. The crowd's energy was palpable, a mix of pride and fierce determination. Faces of all ages and backgrounds reflected the long journey toward justice, their eyes bright with the promise of a new day. The hashtag had become a symbol, a shared language for those who had been sidelined for too long. Inside the office, Victoria's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the endless stream of posts and shares. The realization that the tide was turning settled heavily on her shoulders. The campaign she had dismissed was now a movement, unstoppable and undeniable. The security guard, once a silent observer, now stood a little taller, his presence a quiet testament to the power of persistence. The city outside seemed to hold its breath, the glow of the hashtag casting a hopeful light on streets that had long been shadowed by exclusion. As the sun set, the billboard's glow grew stronger, illuminating the faces of those who had fought in silence and now stood ready to be seen. The hashtag was no longer just a trend. It was a legacy in the making. Victoria Crane sat alone in her office, the glow of her laptop the only light in the dim room. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, the words of her resignation email typed out but unsent. The subject line was stark: effective immediately. She read it over and over, each word a quiet admission of defeat. Her fingers trembled, the weight of responsibility pressing down as she remembered the meetings, the dismissals, the slow unraveling of her authority. She glanced around the office, taking in the empty chairs, the scattered documents, the framed awards that now felt hollow. The silence was thick, broken only by the distant hum of the city below. Victoria closed her eyes, letting memories wash over her. Boardroom confrontations, the faces of colleagues who had once looked to her for guidance, the moments she had chosen comfort over courage. She thought of Amara's campaign, the mural, the chants outside. The world had shifted, and she could no longer pretend otherwise. Her hand moved to the mouse, hovering over the send button. She hesitated, her breath shallow, the finality of the moment settling in her chest. With a slow exhale, she clicked. The email vanished into cyberspace, a quiet but irrevocable end to her chapter at Sterling PR. The screen faded to black, the soft glow replaced by her own reflection in the darkened glass. Outside, the city lights blinked on, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the office above. The camera lingered on Victoria's empty chair, the resignation email still open on the screen. The air was heavy with the knowledge that something fundamental had changed, not just for Victoria, but for the entire system she had represented. As she gathered her things, her movements were slow, almost ritualistic. She paused at the door, looking back one last time before stepping out into the corridor. The office, once a fortress of power, now felt like a relic, silent, empty, and ready for something new. The early morning light crept through the windows of Amara's new office, painting soft gold across the walls. The space buzzed with quiet energy, laughter, the shuffle of papers, the hum of a team that finally felt seen. In the midst of it all, the janitor from Sterling's old lobby moved with practiced ease, mop and bucket in hand. But his posture was lighter now, his steps unhurried. He paused by the break room, straightening a framed photo of Amara's diverse team, faces bright with hope, caught mid-laugh. He lingered, letting his gaze rest on the image, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. This was not the world he had cleaned for years, where his presence was invisible and his nods of solidarity went unnoticed. Here, every detail felt different. The open doors, the welcoming chatter, the sense that everyone belonged. As he moved through the halls, staff greeted him by name. A young designer offered him a fresh cup of coffee, a small gesture that spoke volumes. He accepted with a quiet "thank you," his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there before. In the corner of the break room, a flyer for new hires caught his eye. Bold letters reading, "All backgrounds welcome." He pinned it straighter, pride swelling in his chest. Outside, the city was waking up, but inside these walls, it felt as though a new day had already begun. The janitor glanced out the window, watching as protesters from months earlier now walked by with heads held high, their signs replaced by smiles. He returned to his work, but this time every sweep of the mop felt like a small victory, a silent celebration of change. As he finished his rounds, he paused once more at the photo, his reflection mingling with those of the team. For the first time in years, he felt not just present, but part of something larger. His smile lingered, quiet and content, a testament to the power of dignity restored. Amara stood on the rooftop of her bustling office, the city lights twinkling like distant stars below. The hum of the city was a quiet backdrop to the moment, a soft reminder of the countless lives touched by the change she had helped ignite. She leaned against the railing, watching the world move beneath her. Taxis, weaving through traffic, street vendors packing up for the night, and the mural glowing under the street lamps across the block. The faces painted there seemed to watch over the neighborhood, silent witnesses to the journey from exclusion to belonging. Inside, her team worked late, their laughter and determination a soft chorus beneath the city's pulse. Amara's reflection shimmered in the glass, a symbol of quiet triumph and unwavering resolve. She caught sight of the word "Stay" graffiti boldly on a nearby Sterling PR billboard, a stark contrast to the fading legacy of the old guard. The message was clear. This was not a fleeting moment, but a new foundation. Her voice, calm and steady, carried over the scene. Change doesn't trend. It stays. The words hung in the air, a quiet declaration that real transformation was, not fleeting, but enduring. She thought of every step that brought her here, the closed doors, the coded dismissals, the moments of doubt, and the victories won in silence. Each one had become part of something lasting, woven into the fabric of the city and the hearts of those who dared to believe. As the night deepened, Amara lingered on the rooftop, feeling the promise of a new day. The city below was changed, not by noise or spectacle, but by the steady, persistent work of those who refused to be erased. The mural's colors glowed brighter, the laughter inside her office grew warmer, and the future felt closer than ever, quiet, resilient, and here to stay. The once bustling corridors of Sterling PR now echoed with a hollow quiet. Desks sat deserted, abandoned coffee mugs leaving faint rings on paperwork that would never be read. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, catching on dust motes and highlighting the emptiness that had replaced the agency's former energy. Victoria sat alone in her office, shoulders hunched, her gaze locked on the glowing screen before her. Amara's campaign tagline, "Ethical is universal," looped in a silent slideshow, each repetition a reminder of opportunities missed and warnings ignored. The silence pressed in, heavy and relentless. Every empty chair in the open workspace became a monument to lost power, every untouched memo a relic of decisions made in arrogance. Victoria's mind replayed boardroom meetings where dissenting voices were brushed aside, where comfort was chosen over courage. Now, those voices echoed in the stillness, impossible to escape. She wandered the office, her heels muffled on the carpet, pausing by desks once filled with laughter and debate. The walls, lined with awards and framed press clippings, felt like artifacts from another era. Victoria's reflection in the glass was tired, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the ache of regret settle deeper. In the break room, a lone mug sat beside a half-finished crossword, abandoned mid-thought. The space felt frozen in time, a snapshot of a world that no longer existed. Victoria lingered, absorbing the weight of what had been lost, not just a company, but a sense of purpose, a belief in her own infallibility. Back in her office, she sank into her chair, the silence now absolute. The cost of ignoring voices that demanded to be heard was written in every empty seat, every lingering regret. Sterling's empire had not fallen with a crash, but with a quiet unraveling, one empty desk at a time. Victoria entered her office early, the quiet broken only by the soft shuffle of papers on her desk. Among the usual stack of reports and memos, a single envelope stood out, handwritten, the edges slightly crumpled. She opened it slowly, recognizing the careful script of a mid-level manager who had always been diligent, never disruptive. Inside, the message was brief but searing. "I can't stay silent anymore." The words trembled with overdue honesty, each letter weighted with the exhaustion of years spent watching injustice pass unchallenged. The letter continued, recounting moments when concerns were dismissed, when innovation was stifled in favor of comfort, when the cost of complicity became too high to bear. "I believed in this place," it read, "but I can't be part of what it's become." Victoria's hand hovered above the note, her eyes suddenly wet. She blinked hard, struggling to keep her composure as the truth cut through her defenses. The letter was not loud or dramatic, but its quiet conviction was a blow, one more fracture in the foundation she had thought was unbreakable. She sat down heavily, reading the letter again, the words echoing in her mind. Around her, the office remained still. Yet the atmosphere had shifted. The resignation was more than a personal decision, it was a signal, a ripple of conscience spreading through the ranks. Others would see this letter and recognize their own doubts, their own fatigue with the status quo. Victoria folded the letter carefully, placing it in her drawer as if it were something fragile. The silence in the room deepened, filled with the knowledge that the walls were closing in, not from scandal or noise, but from the steady, honest refusal to remain complicit. The foundation of Sterling's empire was cracking, not with shouts, but with the soft, persistent truth that one voice, finally raised, could change everything. Sunlight streamed into Amara's new office, bathing the room in a warm glow. Across from her sat a former Sterling client, once fiercely loyal to the old agency, now holding a new contract in her hands. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet sense of reckoning, the air thick with the weight of choices made and bridges burned. The client's voice was soft but unwavering as she slid the contract across the table. "Your silence was louder than their noise," she said, her eyes meeting Amara's with a mixture of relief and resolve. "I realized I was staying with them out of habit, not conviction. When I needed them to speak up, they disappeared behind. Their own comfort, your campaign, spoke for all of us who felt unseen." Amara accepted the contract with calm dignity, her hand steady as she signed her name. There was no gloating, no need for grand gestures. The moment itself was enough, a quiet exodus from the old guard to the new, a shift that spoke louder than any press release or public statement ever could. The client lingered for a moment, her gaze drifting to the mural on the wall, its colors vibrant with hope and resilience. "This is what partnership should feel like," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not just business, but belonging." As she left, Amara watched her go, feeling the significance settle in her chest. This was more than a victory. It was a turning point. One by one, others would follow, drawn not by noise or spectacle, but by the promise of being truly heard. Back at Sterling, The news of the defection spread quickly, a ripple of unease passing through the empty halls. For Victoria and the few who remained, the loss was more than financial. It was a public acknowledgement that silence in the face of injustice was no longer acceptable. The shift was quiet, but the message was unmistakable. The era of empty. Noise was over. The first morning at Unapologetic felt electric, the air charged with anticipation and hope. Amara arrived early, unlocking the doors to a space that felt entirely different from the sterile halls of Stirling. Sunlight poured through wide windows, illuminating a long table where chairs of every style and color had been gathered. No, two alike, a deliberate choice. It was a table built for everyone, not just the privileged few. As the team filtered in, the room filled with laughter, animated conversation, and the clatter of coffee mugs. Diverse creators took their seats, designers, strategists, writers, each bringing their own stories and perspectives. Amara moved among them, her presence both steady and welcoming, listening as ideas bounced around the room. There was no hierarchy here, no invisible lines dividing whose voice mattered more. Every suggestion was met with genuine curiosity, every concern taken seriously. A young copywriter, new to the industry, nervously pitched a campaign rooted in her own cultural background. Instead of the familiar dismissals, she was met with encouragement and thoughtful questions. Across the table, a veteran strategist nodded in agreement, adding his own experience to the mix. The energy was contagious, a ripple of creativity and respect that made even the quietest team members feel seen. Amara watched the scene unfold, pride swelling in her chest. This was what she had fought for, not just a new agency, but a new way of working. The walls were covered with vision boards, sketches, and handwritten notes, each one a testament to the collaborative spirit that now defined Unapologetic. As the meeting drew to a close, Amara stood at the head of the table, her voice calm but resolute. "This is our space," she said. "Here, every voice matters. Here, we build together." The applause was genuine, the smiles wide. The shift was palpable, a new chapter, a new table, and a future shaped by those who had once been pushed aside. Victoria settled into the back seat of the Uber, the city lights blurring past the window as she tried to steady her breath. The driver's radio played a podcast. Amara's voice filled the car, calm and resolute, discussing the power of building new spaces rather than waiting for acceptance. The words cut through the quiet, each sentence a reminder of the world that had changed while Victoria clung to the old. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the seat, knuckles pale. She avoided the driver's glance in the rearview mirror, her lips pressed into a thin line. The words on the podcast echoed in her mind. "We're not waiting for a seat. We're building our own." Victoria's jaw clenched, but she couldn't escape the message, its truth settling between them like a heavy fog. The driver glanced at her, offering a small, knowing smile, one that seemed to say he understood the shift in the air, the new reality that Victoria was only beginning to face. She nodded slightly, unable to find words. The ride was quiet, the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of Amara's voice the only sounds. Victoria's mind wandered through memories of boardrooms and decisions, of voices she'd dismissed and moments she'd chosen, comfort over courage. Each streetlight that passed felt like a checkpoint on a journey she hadn't chosen, but could no longer avoid. As the podcast continued, Amara's voice became a steady beacon of hope and change. Victoria's gaze softened, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps regret, passing through her eyes. The ride ended, and she stepped out into the night, the city feeling unfamiliar and charged with possibility. The driver watched her go, the small smile lingering as the car pulled away. For Victoria, it was a quiet farewell to a world that had shifted beneath her feet, a world she could no longer control, but one she might finally begin to understand. The break room at Unapologetic was alive with the sounds of a new beginning, coffee brewing, laughter echoing, and the shuffle of people settling into their day. The janitor from Sterling's old lobby entered quietly, his presence now met with nods and genuine greetings. He moved with a sense of belonging, no longer invisible in the background but part of the daily rhythm. On the bulletin board, a bright flyer caught his eye. Now hiring, all backgrounds welcome. The words were bold, the message clear. He took a moment to smooth the corners, pinning it carefully so everyone could see. It was a small act, but it carried the weight of years spent working in places where such promises were never made. He lingered for a moment, watching as a group of new hires gathered by the coffee machine, their conversation a blend of different languages and experiences. One of them, noticing the flyer, smiled at him and said, "It's good to see someone like me here." The janitor nodded, pride swelling in his chest. For the first time he felt that the door was open, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever felt shut out. The room was filled with small signs of change, a wall of Polaroids showing every team member, a stack of suggestion cards inviting ideas from all staff, a calendar marked with cultural celebrations from around the world. The janitor took it all in, the sense of possibility almost overwhelming. He returned to his work with a lighter step, the flyer a silent promise that the future would be different. As he left the break room, he glanced back one last time, his smile lingering. In this new space, every role mattered, every background was valued, and the foundation of the company was built on the belief that everyone belonged. Amara stood at her office window as dusk settled over the city, the glass reflecting both the glowing skyline and her own steady gaze. Below, her team's laughter floated up from the open workspace, a sound that once would have felt out of place in the rigid halls of Sterling, but now filled the air with warmth and belonging. She watched them for a moment, their faces lit by the soft glow of desk lamps and computer screens, each person a testament to the new world she had helped create. Her own reflection merged with the city lights, a symbol of how far she'd come. The journey had been long and often lonely, marked by closed doors, coded dismissals, and the quiet ache of being overlooked. But here, in this space she had built from the ground up, every challenge had become part of the foundation. The glass no longer separated her from the world outside. It now revealed a landscape transformed by resilience and vision. Amara's thoughts drifted to the countless times she'd been told to wait her turn, to make herself smaller, to accept less. Each memory was a reminder of the quiet strength it took to persist, to keep moving forward when the world seemed determined to hold her back. Now, her victory was not loud or boastful, but woven into the everyday moments. The shared jokes, the open exchange of ideas, the sense of safety that permeated every corner of her agency. She placed her hand on the cool glass, feeling the pulse of the city and the energy of her team. The world outside was changed, not by a single act, but by the accumulation of small, determined choices. Amara smiled, her eyes bright with resolve. This was her triumph, a legacy built on dignity, community, and the unwavering belief that real change begins quietly, then grows until it cannot be denied. As night settled over the city, Amara remained. By her office window, the world below transformed by the quiet revolution she had helped spark. Billboards and murals glowed in the darkness, each one bearing the message that had become her legacy. Ethical is universal. The city, once indifferent, now pulsed with the energy of a movement that refused to fade. Inside, the laughter of her team drifted through the halls, mingling with the gentle hum of late-night work. Amara's gaze swept across the skyline, her reflection a steady presence in the glass. She thought of the journey, every setback, every coded dismissal, every small victory that had led to this moment. The struggle had never been about going viral or chasing fleeting attention. It had always been about building something that would last. Her voice, calm and unwavering, echoed in the stillness. Change doesn't trend. It stays. The words lingered, a quiet affirmation that true transformation is not a passing moment, but a new foundation. She watched as a group of young creatives left the building, their faces lit by hope, their futures wide open. The city lights flickered, each one a testament to the power of persistence, dignity, and collective courage. The camera panned from Amara's window to the streets below, where murals and billboards carried her message into the night. The world outside was quieter now, but the shift was unmistakable. Justice, once whispered in back rooms and private conversations, was now woven into the fabric of every day. Amara turned from the window, her heart full. The story was not about her alone, but about everyone who had dared to believe that justice could be more than a trend. It could be a promise kept, a truth lived, a change that would stay.